as a constant sounding board. And in the end he said, who else is there but Matisse? Yeah. And I think it's also true of the other one.
I know you want to avoid sports metaphors in terms of competition, and in terms of a race, in terms of a fight to the end to who is the best. But there is this thing about life and sports. Competition between two warriors brings out the best in both. It does. Larry Bird and Magic Johnson in professional basketball, McEnroe and Borg in tennis, Hogan and Snead in golf. That was true. Even though it wasn't a race, they brought out the best in each other. Yes?
I would agree with that. The difference, of course, is that they were playing an identical game by the same set of rules, so the measurement is easy. Matisse and Picasso often were pursuing different ends in
There's
art.
a way to keep score. There's no way to keep score in art. Right. Yeah. But what then is the same answer to how Matisse influenced Picasso? Or the way Picasso influenced Matisse? In the end, it's the same answer, by being Picasso and by being Matisse.
I think having the presence of another creator who each recognized was of a level of complexity and ambition equal to their own made the world a different place for each of them, and made them think of their place in that world differently than if the other person hadn't been there. And I think, there are moments where they drift apart and where they feel the other person isn't there. We've already talked about the 30s, and I think that Yves Lambois, the scholar earlier, emphasized the degree in which when Picasso paints those very Matissean odalisques of the early 30s, they're a critique, in a certain sense, of what had become a certain lassitude or a certain comfortableness in Matisse's art. And by turning up the volume on the color, by wrenching up the structure in the odalisques, as Bois put it, he said, come on back out and play. Yeah. Come on, let's get back on the court here. You've been away for a while. Come on back out here, or I'm going to steal your ball from you. And I think there's that
I will
sense,
become the greatest unless you get back on the field.
I'm going to take over your territory and plant my flag on your turf unless you get back out here and get in the game with me again. And I think there is some truth to that metaphor, that idea that each of them, though Matisse could call Picasso a bandit, say showing with him is like being shut up with an epileptic, that they, in their heart of hearts, they knew that they had become greater artists by virtue of the presence of the other.
I would only add that clearly we are interested in this exhibition in showing how their work relates. We don't claim, however, that Matisse spent this whole working day thinking about Picasso or Picasso about Matisse. And when you put their work together, you not only see how they relate to each other, but how they don't relate to each other. And there's this whole other world there. And I think that,
but how is that reflected? I mean, that's only reflected in the art that you don't have here.
No, I think it's actually reflected in these, because once you see the comparison, you see, yes, that looks like that, and then as you look at it, you see, but actually it doesn't look like that. They drift close, they drift apart. You see with, very similar pictures how they treat them differently. And in fact, we've tried to calibrate the comparisons through the exhibition. So sometimes we're saying, look how, for example, they treat a studio subject in very different ways. The Matisse in a soft tonal way, which looks back to Corot. The Picasso in a way which looks a bit like Mondrian. That the prize apart, other times they come together.
Well, some will argue, critics will argue, that in order to show this relationship, you're stretching it, because you look at they painted the same thing, therefore it's a comparison between Matisse and Picasso when it's not. Tell me if that's relevant. Do you think?
It's very relevant, because when we were putting together the groupings and the pairs, we decided if it's simply the same subject treated by them both, it's not going to be enough. If it's simply them both using the same colors, same shapes, it's not going to be enough. We needed something where either there was actually a historically documented relationship, where we knew that Picasso had seen this, Matisse had seen that, where there was a link of technique, where there was enough accumulated similarities and differences to work. you know, it's like rules of evidence. You know, one wasn't enough. There had to be, you know, 3 things at least to bring these
you
works
have 2
together.
sources in journalism before you can go with the story. Kirk, give me.
Well, I also think that the show is conceived in 34 sort of units or chapters, and sometimes the units are just 2 pictures facing each other, sometimes they're a group of pictures. Sometimes the reason for having that unit together is it's the same year and we know they looked at each other's pictures and they're really immediate reactions. Sometimes it's their consideration of a common theme that they reflected over a long period of years. When we do the sculpture of Picasso in the 30s, we think that Picasso is probably looking at the Matisse sculpture show from the late 20s, which shows the sculpture that Matisse made in the teens reacting to, in part, Picasso's sculpture of 1909, so that there you have a dialogue that stretches over a long period of time. So there's no one principle. The viewer is asked, in fact, to shift gears several times within the show to reconsider the terms on which the dialogue is done. And sometimes it is a term of clash or opposition within the treatment of the same subject. When we put the 2 odalisques together in the early 30s, we're putting a beautiful, luscious, very sensual Matisse against a Picasso which is willfully ugly and deforming, because we want to make the point that Picasso is making an aggressive anti-Matisse, that he's making a specific statement in the same format, the nude in the armchair, which had been Matisse's signature, in order purposefully to attack or thumb his nose at Matisse. That's not the same reason that we're putting together portraits in the early part of the show. So we try to cover all the different gamuts, all the different ways in which they related to each other, by clash and opposition, by hostility, by mutual dependence, by borrowing, by reinventing themselves in relation to the other in 34 different installments.
You know what stuns me is that no one has done this. There was something at the Kimball, there was something in 1947 since. These 2 giants of the 20th century brought together in this extraordinary, I mean, you can't sit here on a Sunday evening and look at these 2 paintings and not think that you're among the lucky of the world to see side by side 2 of the greatest cultural figures and artists of the 20th century. I'm amazed it hasn't been done before. Why is that?
It is interesting. We've asked ourselves this. One thing is it's obvious. Another thing is it's not obvious at all.
Yeah.
You know, that as these 2 artists became famous and became the artists with the reputation they had, it was natural for people to oppose them. And as you know, it's so convenient to do this, to say Matisse is like this, Picasso is like that. And, you know, as Kirk was saying right at the beginning, they are taught separately in the textbooks. Picasso appears in the chapter on Cubism, Matisse appears in the chapter on Fauvism. You know, it requires thinking out of the box to show them together. It also requires the Musée of Modern Art getting together with the Centre Pompidou and the Musée Picasso and the TED.
2 people that had a lot of paintings to put together.
You know, there are 20+ paintings from the MoMA collection in this exhibition, same rough number from Paris.
Will we see their like again?
2 artists like this, you only get to be a pioneer once, I think, and the combination that they had of being present at the creation of one of the most traumatic breaks in the history of representation. I mean, something that deserves comparison with the invention of perspective and the birth of the Renaissance, the period from 1890 to 1920 in terms of the invention of a new set of arguments and a new set of ways of representing. The 2 of them are so embedded in that moment of creation, and yet, as John said, so much aware of their place in a larger artistic tradition. That combination of being a radical revolutionary and feeling at the same time one's link to the great artists of the past is something that was a field of possibilities open to them at that moment. It's hard to recreate, hard to think of how that opportunity exists in similar balance for another artist after them.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you, Kirk.